YouTube, welcome back to my channel. Welcome to day 19 of Vlogmas and day 6 of Litmas. Today's Litmas challenge is to share your story with literature, and I feel like I've given you snippets of my literature background before, so I won't go into too much detail. I won't ramble. I'll just tell you I started off being a reader. My parents are both teachers. I grew up in a house that was filled with books. It was a small house, but there were books everywhere. My dad went to college in Connecticut in the United States, but before that he and my mom went to Teachers College in Jamaica, and they had books that dealt with their craft. Non-fiction books about psychology and child development. My dad had his short story collections where I talked about that when I was sharing my favorite short story recently. There were books about math and English and science and encyclopedias and books about the Bible and religious books in general and books about just about everything. And I read voraciously. I was encouraged to be an avid reader. You know, when parents want to show off their children's abilities and they get them to recite the ABCs or to count to 100 or whatever, my parents did that by showing other people how well we could read elevated material. We had a newspaper in Jamaica called The Gleaner, and whenever we'd meet my dad's friends, especially those that he hadn't seen in a while, and he would say, "Karen, read The Gleaner for this person," and I would take it out and I would read a paragraph from this, scholarly paper. And I always felt very proud of my being able to read. I grew up in a farming community in rural Jamaica, and there were a lot of people in our community, people who were our neighbors and friends who did not have a literary background. So some of them, they stopped going to school pretty early because they wanted to be able to start working, to farm, or to do a craft or a trade or something in order to look after their families. And that was a pretty normal thing to do, back in the time when I was growing up and like the generation before me was growing up. There were a lot of people that we knew who were functionally literate. They could read their names, sign their name to official documents, but they weren't readers. They weren't going to the libraries and checking out books and reading them at night. There were people who, when I was growing up, didn't have electricity in their house. So to read by candlelight or to read by lamplight was just an added expense because, instead of that, you could turn the lights off and go to sleep. So while I was an avid reader, the people in my household were avid readers. My brother doesn't read everything, but my brother loves reading science books, books that tell him how to do something. He'll read that from cover to cover. My dad reads math books. My mom reads everything, but she primarily reads fiction. She used to read those romance novels when I was growing up, and I always wanted to read them too. But despite that backdrop, where I lived, we were part of a literary community because of the people that I met in school and because of my parents' professional background. So while there were people around us who were, for the most part, non-readers, I always knew that that was never going to be my path. I always knew that I loved reading. I always knew that reading was expected of me and that I enjoyed it. So it didn't really matter what those expectations were. So one of my aunts was the librarian for the neighborhood library, and because of my connection with her, I was able to check out books and keep them for as long as I wanted. At our primary school, my mom functioned as the school librarian, so I could take out books and keep them for as long as I want. At home, I didn't always have a ton of age-appropriate fiction books that were age-appropriate for me, but I always had access to them, whether from the local library, from our school library, or also the books that I would get as gifts. But then, when you are as voracious a reader as I was at that point, it's just never enough. And so that is why I would read a lot of my father's books and my mother's books. And I've just been reading my whole life. I didn't do as well in high school literature as you might think because I didn't like the structured approach to something that I had approached purely out of passion for most of my life. I didn't take the literature class. Also, my teacher was not a literary expert. I never considered him an expert. But that's so far in the past, I don't even want to dwell on that. But that experience in high school literature didn't diminish my passion for reading, and it also didn't quell my ability to write. So I had this weird experience that in high school I was praised for writing my own fiction but didn't do well at analyzing other people's. But that experience did not do anything to keep me from the written word, and so I have been reading passionately ever since. I've never done formal literature study at the college level, so I bring comparison from the humanities or history or art based on things that I have experienced through my own life, my own reading. So if there's anything that you get from my reading critically, it is just based on my experience as a reader, not because of anything that was taught to me. And I honestly prefer it that way. Like, I don't feel like my reading has been that influenced by any external force. It's purely been driven by my own initiative and my own interest. When I moved to New York, I started school almost immediately. You know, when you're in college, sometimes you don't have time to read for fun during the semester. On that first day of the holiday, one of the first things I would do would be to go to the public library and check out as many books as they would allow me so that I would have reading material to last me throughout that holiday period. And that has not changed. I still go to the public library as often as I can. Even though I have all of these books and all the other books everywhere else in this space, I still take books from the library, and I'm always still buying books. And that, I think, will continue as long as I'm able. I was reading a Wikipedia entry on Shirley Jackson a few days ago, and it said that she and her husband, who also had a very strong literary background, that they were so enthusiastic about books that their personal library had over 100,000 books. And it gave me pause. I was like, is this the beginning of a new goal for the Karen Wright Library? 100,000 books. What does that collection look like? So that is maybe my literary future. 100,000 books. Yeah. My story with literature is far from being over. I have started writing and publishing. Last year I published a short story collection entitled It's Complicated, Short Stories About Long Relationships. And this year I focused on writing some poetry, which is to be published. It's coming soon. It just hasn't been released yet. And also a couple of novels that I worked on this year that are almost ready for publication, but not quite. For tomorrow's Litmas challenge, I'm going to be sharing one of my poems. So I hope you'll come back for that, because my story with literature is far from being over, thanks to BookTube that has allowed me to see that I'm not so much of a weirdo for loving books almost as much as I love people. So thanks for watching this video. Leave me a comment down below if you've been doing the Litmas challenge and you shared your own story with literature. I would love to check it out. And until we return for day 20 of Vlogmas and day 7 of Litmas, happy reading. Bye.